Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked for Life Fly Fishing, and in this video let's talk about the action of our streamers, the action that we give it, and its intrinsic action, in the way the fly is constructed and the way it's designed. So I've got 4 streamers here. I can count this time. And we have a feather wing, a classic bucktail, another feather wing, and my Weimer pattern. Now, if you're going to make a choice between these, a lot of it has to do with your river, because these flies will have different action in different currents. So if you've got very high turbulence, fast flowing, high gradient river, you might want to go for something like this bucktail here. It'll ride more level, and that wing that's spiked right up will collapse in a heavier flow. And that's what you want. You want it to form the profile of a bait fish. And it will do that in heavy current. It will squish down. Whereas if you use this fly in a weaker flow, you're going to still have that wedge shape. That it's got this wedge shape going on here, and you'll still see that wedge. In fact, if you look at some of the bucktails that are used out west, that wedge is even more pronounced. It looks, something like this, and they do that for a reason, because if you're fishing really fast flowing, turbulent, high gradient rivers, you want a little bit of squish there, so when it goes down you're going to get some movement as the current flows over it, so it'll sort of ebb and flow with the current, and it gives it some life. And because it's a long shank hook, in heavier currents it'll tend to ride a little bit more level than it would be in slow currents. In slow currents it'll really hang. That back end will really sag down. I have a video on that where I talk about how you get this back end sag on a lot of flies that are tied on these long shanked hooks. So if you're in the high gradient rivers, there are certain designs that work really well. Bucktails work really well. And the one thing about bucktails, they're also more durable too. Feather wings, they may be lovely, but how well they work in really fast currents, it'll be iffy. They tend to work better in slower currents because they'll really get flattened in fast currents. Plus, there's a chance that they'll get chewed up on the first fish, and you've put a lot of effort into a fly, and now it's garbage. I've had that happen. Actually, it's my son that had it happen. I gave him one of my deceivers to use in the Niagara River in the whirlpool. And there's muskie in there, and we assumed it was a muskie that hit it because the back end of the fly was trashed. So everything behind the hook was pretty well either gone or mangled. So, so it was a one and done fly, and we didn't even hook the fish. So, feather wings are less common where durability might be an issue, and less common in high turbulent flows. You're more likely to see a bucktail. Now, we get something like my Weimer pattern. It can be used pretty well anywhere. If you want to use it in a high turbulent, fast-flowing river, it will still look good, and you could put a little bit of more of an underwing of bucktail just to keep that, goat hair from squishing down too much. It'll work just fine, and the marabou will keep going, no matter what. So this thing works in slow flows and works in fast flows. So that's about the fly. Now, what about the action we give it and the choices we make? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is size. And that's the size of the fly. The smaller the fly, the less drastic our stripping and moving should be. So little short, little jerky strips for very small streamers. Bigger streamers represent bigger fish. You want to get longer, slower pulls. And so you're adjusting your stripping to whether the streamer is large or small, whether it's imitating a small little darting bait fish or one that tends to swim in smoother lines. It tends to be less of a darter and more of a straight swimmer. That also affects whether we're going to strip or swing, because a fly like this, bucktail, in slow flows, you swing this thing, it looks dead. Yeah, you might catch a fish here and there. That happens. There's always one that'll, be willing to give it a whack. But you really have to move something like this. And if you're dealing with slow flows, you're going to have to strip it fairly fast. to keep it looking lively. But a feather wing, especially this one here with the short shank hook, you've got a better chance of this riding more level in a lower flow and looking more lively in a lower flow. So you're adjusting the fly to the flow rate, and you're adjusting your stripping to the size of the fly and the type of the fly. So whether you swing or strip, it depends on the size of the fly, it depends on the flow rate, depends on the turbulence, depends on the design of the fly. So think about your fly. What's it look like in the water? And one of the habits you should always get into with streamers, you walk up to the river, you've got a streamer tied on, dunk it in the water, get it wet, then hold it in the current and watch what it does. And see if it's sagging, see if it's moving, or does it just sitting there looking rather dead? Does it have life? Does it look like something that a fish would want to eat? Or is it just something hanging in the current? You might want to put in a couple of strips to see if it changes things. So be prepared to, look at what your fly looks like in the water before you, really commit to it. Make some decisions about how you're going to fish it based on what you saw. Because one of the things I've found over the years is we have impressions in our mind how this fly is going to work when we put it in water, in current, and yet when we do, you're getting a different appearance, and it's not behaving the way you thought it was going to behave, for good or bad. It may even be better than you expected, which is great. But you should take that moment to check the swim of the fly. There's other reasons too. If you did a bad job of tying it, it could go on its side. You're not going to get fish that way. Your fly has to be oriented properly. Or the other thing that you need to check for is when you put in a strip. I always suggest you put a strip in when you're testing, is because a fly may ride level in the current. As soon as you strip it, it kicks to its side and then settles back down again. That's kind of iffy if you want to catch fish. That might work as a cripple, but you should be aware of it. So that's a fly I would swing and give it the odd little yank just to kick it out and then let it drop back down again. That might be a thought. The trouble is when you get a fly like this and it goes from slow to fast current, it will ride on its side all of the time. So check your swim when you get in. Make sure it's doing what you expect it's going to do and it looks like you expect it's going to do. And here's our problem. You get in a pattern book and you tie a bunch of flies like this, right? You've got a whole box full of streamers and you go, oh, this one looks neat, I'm going to use this one. And it's totally inappropriate for your river because it was designed with a totally different river in mind. So its construction is built for that river. And your river may be too slow or too fast, too turbulent or too smooth to make that fly do what it's supposed to do. So there's more to this than just tying a nice looking streamer and chucking it out there. Yes, we'll catch the odd fish. There's always one that's willing to oblige. But if you put some thought into how fast you move it, what the fly looks like in the water, you check it before you actually start swinging it and stripping it, and I think your hit rate will go up an awful lot more. So give that some thought. Cheers.